All right, good evening and welcome to our first ever Iowa City Budget Basics discussion. I'm Jeff Fruin, I'm the city manager here in Iowa City, and I'm joined tonight by our Public Works Director, Ron Konecki, and our Parks Director, Julie Seidel-Johnson. I want to thank you for joining us for this first ever Facebook Live experiment. We're excited to be here. Hopefully give you a glimpse into the fiscal year 19 budget that starts July 1st of 2018. Now we only have an hour here tonight to go through a pretty complex document. If you want to dive deep into the budget, you can actually view the proposed budget on our website at icgov.org/budget. It's only about 700 pages long. I highly recommend the reading to anybody interested in local government, or maybe that perhaps needs a little help falling asleep tonight. Throughout this session, we are going to give you an opportunity to ask questions and share comments about the budget. We will be flagged when there's questions and answer them as they go. We will hold some until the end, and if we cannot get to some questions, we will certainly follow up after this session is over and get responses out as soon as we can. The focus tonight is pretty simple. We have a basics budget overview that I will provide to start us, and then Ron and Julie are going to fill us in on some of the exciting projects happening in Iowa City over the next couple of years. So a couple of quick basics about the Iowa City budget. It's a rather large operation that not everybody is aware of, but it's about a $160 million operation that we plan for fiscal year 19. As a city, we have over 600 full-time permanent employees, and throughout the season, throughout the different seasons, we'll add a couple of hundred temporary employees to the mix. Over 80% of our revenue that comes into the city to help us run our operations comes from three primary sources. The largest is property taxes. About 36% of the revenue that operates the city comes from our property taxes. The second highest category would be our charges for services. Charges for services would be things like the payment on your water bill, or your sewer payment, or your trash payment. That would account for about 26% of the $160 million that it takes to run the Iowa City government. And lastly, the third highest would be intergovernmental revenue. These would be federal and state funds that are passed down to us to operate. Probably the best example that I could give to you would be the motor fuel tax that you pay when you fill up your car with gas. That money goes to the state. They then pass a share of that along to us here in Iowa City. On the expenditure side, as you can imagine, it's a pretty diverse array of operations that we have to fund. Some of the largest operations include our public safety operations, our police and fire, our public works operations, which you'll hear a little bit tonight with Ron, and our capital projects. And you're going to hear about a number of the capital projects. Capital projects are the big projects that are sometimes a nuisance when they're under construction, but hopefully are nice improvements when we're done. And both Ron and Julie are going to talk about some of the exciting capital projects and their operations tonight. Before we get too deep into the budget, I want to give you a little bit of the context in which we're operating in this year with the budget. Iowa City is a rapidly growing community, one of the fastest growing communities in the state of Iowa. Since 2010, we've added 6,536 residents. That's nearly 10% of our population. To put that in context, the Census Bureau estimates that our neighboring communities of Coralville and North Liberty have added 1,490 residents and 5,146 residents, respectively. So while many think of our neighboring communities as growing quite quickly, and they indeed are, the Census Bureau actually estimates that Iowa City has added more population than both of those communities, and nearly more than both of those communities combined. With that growth comes real challenges. There's challenges in maintaining infrastructure and expanding infrastructure. There's challenges to provide basic services like public safety services, but also quality of life amenities like parks that you'll hear about tonight with Julie. At the same time, where we have growing demands on our services, we do have some constraints on how we operate. In 2013, the state legislature passed property tax reform, and that has really put a squeeze on some of the revenue that we need to operate this community. For example, the reform had an impact on how apartments in the state of Iowa are valued. We estimate that for this budget that begins on July 1st, 2018, we will lose about $1.6 million in tax revenue due to that one change alone, and there are certainly several other changes that impact us. So it's a very difficult context in which to operate, in which to budget. We know we have growing demands and growing expectations from the public, but we also have some fiscal constraints that we have to operate within. A little bit about our budget process. Our budget process is pretty much 12 months. We really never stop. It starts with the departments, like Ron and Julie's operations. They will work as a team and develop their recommended budgets. Those get sent to the finance department and to the city manager's office, where we spend several months reviewing those with departments. And ultimately, the city manager's office is charged with making a budget recommendation to the city council. As elected officials, the city council have the final authority on the budget, and they really spend the months of January and February deliberating the budget. And that's where we sit today. The city council has held a couple of work sessions on the budget, and they likely have a couple more to go. So certainly feedback that we get tonight, we will pass along to the city council, and they will take that into consideration as they make any final adjustments to the budget. Quick about budget philosophy and just a really high level of how I look at the budget. I always think the first priority are the core services. We want to make sure that the water is clean and safe and delivered to your residents. We want to make sure the streets are in good condition. There's plenty of well-maintained parks to enjoy. All those types of things that we can sometimes take for granted, we have to make sure that we take care of first. And then as we have flexibility to do more, we then look to the city council priorities. And we will get into some of those city council priorities tonight with the topics that we talk about. But that's really at a very high level is how we look at budgeting with the Iowa City government. So with that, we're going to start a conversation with Ron and Julie, and we're going to start with our Public Works Director, Ron Konecki. If you're not familiar with Public Works, it is one of our largest operations in the city and most diverse operations. So everything from streets, water, sewer, landfill, equipment maintenance, and more, that falls under the purview of Ron. And to start off, we're going to talk about a couple of the big projects, one that's ongoing and one that'll be kicked off this year. Ron, could you tell us a little bit about the Gateway project on Dubuque Street? Question that we both get on a regular basis. Where are we at with that project? When can we expect it to wrap up? And then looking ahead, there's been a lot of talk in the community about the Pedmore renovation project. And could you fill us in on that one too, please?
Yes, I will. I just want to start off, it's hard to believe that we're coming up on our 10th anniversary of the flood of 2008. That flood resulted in approximately $160 million worth of capital projects in our community. The city was able to secure about $100 million in federal aid and state assistance. And then our community also passed a local option sales tax, which resulted in about $35 million worth of funding for our projects. So with that, the flood created an opportunity for our two largest capital projects that we've ever undertaken. The first was our wastewater plant consolidation project, about a $45 million project, which opened up the area for the Riverfront Crossings Park. And the second which is ongoing, is the Gateway project, $40.5 million project consisting of elevating Dubuque Street, updating and reconstructing all the utilities within that corridor, and then also constructing a new Park Road bridge and realigning Park Road. The project is currently on schedule, I'm happy to report. This summer we will have a closure of Park Road, which will allow for the new bridge to be tied into the Park Road alignment, and then also the Dubuque Street alignment. Paving should be open for football season, and we'll have some final touches that will occur in the fall and then next spring as far as the restoration work, getting some plantings done and getting the grass to grow as we move forward. And then a part of that also will be the removal or deconstruction of the existing Park Road Bridge, which will occur after the new tie-in is done. And then this year we will begin, if we receive good bids on our pedestrian mall project. We have a project estimate about $6.8 million. It will be constructed in two phases. The first phase will be the Dubuque Street corridor. That will include the area where the existing stage is and the fountain area. That will be started in April and should be finished in in October of this year. Then the second phase will be the College Street leg, which will incorporate from Lynch Street all the way through the Clinton Street intersection, and that is scheduled for 2019. Along with that corridor, the Clinton Street corridor, we will have a project that will reconstruct the Clinton and Burlington Street intersections. It's about a $1.1 million project. Along with that, we will restripe Clinton Street from Benton Street all the way to Church Street and have on-street bicycle facilities as a part of that project.
Great. A lot going on, and one of the things I've really appreciated about our staff is the willingness to take on some really difficult projects. And we've had a pretty aggressive CIP in the last 4 or 5 years. That's a capital improvement plan. So we've seen some major projects undertaken in addition to all the flood recovery things. So it's really nice to see that we haven't really skipped a beat on the flood recovery. At the same time, we've continued to address some of the critical community needs. I think the Ped Mall is an example of that. Certainly the First Avenue grade separation project that was recently completed was one of those, another one of those very difficult projects. Turning to parks, we have a really exciting project that I know you get a lot of questions on. Ron alluded to it. It's really stemming out of those flood recovery efforts that started on the public works side, and now you get the fun part. They took out the sewer plant and relocated the operations, and you get to build a park. So tell us about the Riverfront Crossings Park.
Riverfront Crossings Park is just a really fun project and going to be a great community gathering space. It ties into our overall park master plan in that we have a theme of gather here, and we've heard loud and clear that people want to get back to the river and they want to have their kids be able to play in the creek. Well, Riverfront Crossing does all that and a lot more. It is an 18-acre parcel of land south of Kirkwood between Gilbert and the Iowa River. Some people know it, as you can see it from Big Grove Brewery. But it has been a fun project that we started last summer. Phase 1 included trail work, so the Iowa River Trail goes through the park, and one of the first things we did was redirected that trail to the west side, so it now has great views of the Iowa River, kept it open. We know that it's one of the most highly traveled trails in Iowa City. The second part of Phase 1 created a wetland, a 5-acre wetland. This was part of the flood mitigation, finishing up the flood mitigation part of the project. So Ralston Creek has been created into an oxbow in the south part of the park. It's a floodable wetland, so it won't be wet all the time, but we'll have a lot of native plants. You see some limestone outcroppings going down there. So people can go down and explore that in the park, although the paved trails don't go down there, but we do think that people will still be able to go down and kind of explore in the natural areas. There is a bridge close to the wetlands that will take you to the new development to the east, including the brewery and some of the new housing that will be coming in there. And then just to the north of that bridge is a big nature play area. We think it'll be one of the largest nature play areas in the state. Very lucky with funding for that with the Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, and then a $50,000 grant from Disney and the National Recreation and Park Association, and several local donors that have come together. So the nature play area will be a fun family place. Nature meaning that there's some non-traditional playground equipment, but there will be some traditional as well. The center of it includes just a simple rolling hill, an area in the ground that we have made. It'll be grassed over so that kids and parents alike can roll down the hill and tunnel underneath it. There's a limestone area that goes down into the creek so kids can actually go down into Ralston Creek and play in the water. And then some traditional playground equipment. There'll be a slide, there will be swings, there'll be a dual zip line. So the zip line is created so that one side has kind of a regular zip line. I want to make sure everyone knows it's child size. This is adults might want to do it, but this is child size. And the second side will have a special swing in it so that kids that maybe have mobility issues or need a little additional help can also get the experience on the zip line. The other parts of the park include an event space, so we hope to be hosting large events, possibly part of the RAGBRAI celebration in July. And that's kind of driving our timeline right now. Phase 1 is nearing completion. Phase 2 is the nature play area, and that will be done this spring. And then Phase 3 we are ready to go out to bid on in February. That includes 2 restroom shelter buildings in the park, outdoor shelters. Other amenities, bike racks, trash cans, lighting, signage, everything else that will help make it really feel like a great public space.
So we have our first question in, and this comes from Derek. And he says, the Riverfront Crossings project is going to be a huge victory for all of you as well as the city. What part of that project are you most proud or excited about?
Well, Derek, I honestly am mostly excited about the nature play area, and in the overall, it's a unique concept. It's got some traditional things to play in, but it's also a creative space. So there are logs and things for kids to tunnel over and jump on and climb on. There'll be sand play areas, some small bouldering rocks to climb on. It's going to be a unique play area. I think that it'll just be an attraction for families to come and spend a lot of time in the park, and it's accessible to a large part of our community. So I'm very excited about that.
If I could add to that, if we take a step back and look at the larger Riverfront Crossings area, it's certainly been one of the hubs for development in the last couple of years, and I'm just really proud of the quality of development that's occurring. We've seen business invest, we've seen new houses built of all scales. I think it's going to be a really diverse neighborhood that's recreated, and a really resilient neighborhood that's coming out of the flood. We would not have the type of activity that we're experiencing in Riverfront Crossing had it not be for the planning efforts that the community undertook after the 2008 flood. So really excited about all the development that's taken place there. The park is kind of going to be that postcard, that signature image, and it's going to be a pretty memorable community space. But there's still a lot more progress in Riverfront Crossings that we'll see over the next few years. So as we transition from that park, and we'll come back and talk about some more parks in a little bit, let's go back to Ron. We talked about Dubuque and some of the downtown improvements. Certainly we have road needs elsewhere in the community. Can you talk about our road resurfacing efforts and maybe what people can expect in the next couple of years?
Sure, and really focusing on what we're going to have going this summer. This summer it will be a banner year in regards to our resurfacing program. We have two major corridors that we'll be working with the DOT on, Riverside Drive and Governor Street. With those two corridors, we'll have our resurfacing program to be approximately $6.6 million. The corridor Governor onto Burlington Street, tying into the bridge there at Ralston Creek. We'll have Riverside Drive basically starting at Highway 1, Riverside Drive, Highway 6 intersection, all the way to Coralville city limits. That those two projects are basically doubles what we would have for our typical overlay programs easily. We will then also then tie into that Governor Street to the south. We'll have Johnson Street, Court Street, kind of tie into that area. And then along with that, we will be striping for on-street bicycle facilities on Governor, also on Dodge Street. And then we'll have some chip seal projects that will go along with that. Along with the Riverside Drive project, we will be reconstructing the Myrtle intersection. That will include turn lanes and a signalized intersection, which then will also allow for a better pedestrian access to the Iowa River Trail. And as development occurs in that corridor, we have a large residential project that's gone on with the old Dodge dealership. We are working on plans for a pedestrian underpass through the railroad embankment, a trail that go along with that, which then will tie that area into the riverfront or the Iowa River Trail also. So there's a lot of things going on. There's with the DOT's cooperation, we've really opened up the ability to do a lot of resurfacing in our community and major corridors in our community.
So while the resurfacing is exciting and it's nice to get those streets addressed, it can also create a kind of a short-term nuisance, and it's going to be a particularly challenging year navigating some of those orange cones this year, all in the name of progress. But with the Governor Street corridor, the Dubuque corridor, which you previously talked about, and I think some work that's going on in First Avenue and Coralville, all the entryways into Iowa City from I-80 are going to be under construction to some degree. So bear with us, please, as we undertake a heavier workload than usual on those streets. Julie, let's talk a little bit about some of the neighborhood parks. You talked about Riverfront Crossings, which is big and visible. People drive by it on a regular basis, but some of the greatest feedback we get are on improvements we've been making in neighborhood parks that people can walk to and enjoy with their family and neighbors. So tell us what's in store. What should we expect in the next year or two when it comes to the smaller parks in Iowa City?
Sure. And as I mentioned before, our master plan calls for gather here. We really see our parks as the neighborhood place where we want neighbors to gather together. I always say as Parks and Rec Director, my job is to get people off their couches and out to know their neighbors next door to them and down the street. We're doing that with a lot of improvements in our neighborhood parks. And maybe first I'll just review, we've got several new playgrounds that went in this past summer. Fronholtz Miller Park got a new playground, Pheasant Hill, Upper City Park, Mercer Park is 2 years old. We've been investing a lot throughout all the neighborhood parks, and that will continue this coming summer. First of all, Creekside Park, which is on 7th Avenue Court, will be getting a renovation. We've gotten some additional land there through some flood buyouts, so we're going to have some additional room for some community gardens in that space, but we're also going to replace the restrooms, shelter, and then move the playground up out of the area that floods quite a bit. So we're excited to have that project. That'll happen late summer into the fall. Cardigan Park is one of our newer parks. It's way out on the east side, Court and Huntington. Last summer it got a new playground, and we'll go back in this year and finish with a loop trail, our first fire ring in the park, a small shelter and a butterfly garden, so kind of a smaller park development. We hope to replace the playground at Villa Park, which is on the west side, just north of Willow Creek Park. I'll get a new playground there and most likely a new small shelter. That will be done early in the summer as we plan for that. And then we are going back into a number of parks to increase the accessibility. One thing our park master plan looked at was it did an audit of our parks to say, are they accessible to a whole range of people? And we found there were a number of areas where we could do better. So we have 3 or 4 parks that will get new concrete paths. Not throughout the entire park. We're definitely not paving over all of nature, but to give people better access to the playgrounds, the restrooms, the park features. So we plan to do those at a Highland Park. We plan to do it go back to Pheasant Hill and finish up the playground area and get some paths into there. And then a little bit at Mercer Park, which just needs a little bit to get us connected better to the new playground and shelter. So those are the major ones happening. We will be finishing up some projects at Hickory Hill Park. So we have a large project that will do trails, replace 2 bridges, put in some signage into the park. And then we received a REAP grant to go in and do some stream bank restoration and some environmental work. We're going to be thinning out some of the trees, but that's to help make the overall woodland canopy more healthy. So it'll be a little bit of an internal transformation in that park, take out a lot of the invasive species, and we're very fortunate to have the Friends of Hickory Hill help us with that. But this will just boost the amount of work that they've been able to do. So just a lot of things happening throughout a lot of the neighborhood parks. We'll start planning for the projects the year after that, and that's going to be our big playground year. So Willow Creek Park will get a facelift with a new playground, as well as Lower City Park with a larger, what we're calling it, an adventure playground, and yet to be designed for what that means. But we've heard a lot of positive comments about the Mercer playground, which is 2 years old, a very large playground. So we're thinking that maybe size, just one size bigger. Even older kids like to play in Mercer, so we want to make sure that there's some things that appeal to all ages will be due to the Lower City Park large playground.
You've been busy.
It's a fun time.
And it's not going to slow down anytime soon.
No.
So you have the Parks Master Plan. You've referenced that a couple of times. And one of the big considerations for the council in this budget was making sure that there was adequate funding to carry out that Parks Master Plan. I know the budget's not final yet, but I think we both feel pretty good about the level of funding that's being committed to parks, not only this year and next, but what's projected out over the next 3, 4, 5 years. I think you're going to be busy for quite some time.
We are, and we're getting out to all the different neighborhoods. I think that's the other neat part of this, is we're doing a little bit in each area of the city to make it happen.
That's great. Another big council initiative that is tied to a master plan is the bicycle master plan. And the community spent about a year last year coming together to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of our community when it comes to folks that want to bicycle, either for commuting purposes or for recreational purposes. We identified a whole list of improvements that can be made, and we're going to focus on some of those improvements now with Ron. So typically, when you're working on the streets, you're focused on the vehicular traffic, but we are quickly going to become a more multimodal community with a lot more bike lanes coming to Iowa City. So tell us about the Bike Master Plan and what projects folks might see this coming year.
Yeah, so in 2017, the City Council adopted and approved our Comprehensive Bicycle Master Plan. These are projects that range from just restriping to actual construction of varying pieces of infrastructure, and also just retrofitting infrastructure. So, in the past year, we've seen South Sycamore Street be restriped. We did a road diet there, went from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. We're able to have bicycle lanes included on that all the way down to the Alexander School. First Avenue with our grade separation project in that corridor, we also went from a 4-lane to a 3-lane from Highway 6 all the way up to Bradford. With these road diet projects, obviously the major driver in this is safety for our traveling public and vehicles, and we look at those corridors where we have a high collision rate for whatever reason, and by adding that 2-way left turn lane, getting those turning traffic out of the through lanes, it helps prevent those rear-end collisions that do occur. So then the question is, what do you do with the extra space of the pavement that already exists? And so that's where those bike lanes get added in those corridors. As we move forward, obviously we mentioned the Clinton Street corridor. We'll have a 4-lane to 3-lane conversion there. We will have Camp Cardinal. We have a stripe shoulder out there that already exists. We'll have some modifications on that. Mormon Trek, we are doing a project there where we're adding some turn lanes at Benton Street, but then we will be adding bike lanes throughout that whole corridor, down basically from Melrose almost to Highway 1. We will have, with the Myrtle intersection improvements, we'll have some bike boulevards that'll be added on the Greenwood Drive area. Governor Street, we mentioned that already. That'd be from Brown to Burlington, and then along with that, we'll have Dodge Street that will go from North Summit to Burlington, and then the Dewey Street and Brown will have bike boulevards. So kind of tying people back through the corridor where we have some narrowness that occurs on Governor Street, where the one-way split begins as you come into town there, or exiting or going to the north. So, we have a lot of exciting things going on in regards to that. The bike lanes will vary from just 1 stripe to a kind of a buffered bike lane where we'll have 2 stripes to give a little bit extra space between the vehicles and the bikes. And then we'll have some trail projects that'll be coming up in 2019. So Willow Creek Trail will be doing some work in the Willow Creek Park connector. We'll have a Highway 1 trail, so we'll continue where we stopped at Sunset out to Mormon Trek. So we're making some major improvements, to just our existing infrastructure and network that we have already in our community.
Great. I think we had a question come in.
This is from Paul. It's a little bit of a broader question, but he wants to know, did you get public feedback beyond committees before you prioritize what projects will be taken on? If so, is it done through surveys, meetings, etc.?
Yeah, great question. The Bike Master Plan was an extensive process led by our transportation planning folks. There were some public meetings that took place, and there was some surveys that were issued that you could participate on both online or through written form. So I think we did a pretty good job of getting the public feedback. As always, when the council considers a plan, there's feedback offered at those council meetings as well. So we absolutely did have the public help us prioritize those projects. I think once we get the public prioritization, there's an extra layer that we need to go through, and that is really focusing on what projects they may match up with well. So if we know we're going to go in and resurface a street, we'll want to take care of some of the bike amenities at the same time. we try not to go into a neighborhood with a major project only to follow that project up with another one that very next year. So sometimes those priorities have to shift with those master plans, but I do think we had a pretty robust public process for that. But Ron, just to recap, so for this next year in terms of bike lanes, the public's going to see Clinton Street with added bike lanes. They're going to see Camp Cardinal convert from a striped shoulder to bike lanes. Mormon Trek will have bike lanes, and then both Dodge and Governor Street.
Correct.
So just as we were talking about on the resurfacing with the extremely high volume of asphalt and concrete streets being rehabilitated, we're going to, it's going to be the year of the bicycle in many respects. We're going to have more on-street lane miles added than probably at any point in our community's history. Is that probably fair to say?
It's fair to say.
Yeah, so very exciting, and I know that's something the City Council has prioritized at a high level, is to really elevate our game when it becomes, when we think about becoming a bicycle-friendly community. Do we have any other questions on the bicycle plan? Okay. Anything else on bicycle plans that you want to touch on?
I think one of the things that we were able to do with this budget was add 2 staff members in our streets department, and part of that is to gear up for the additional maintenance that's going to come up with these on-street bicycle facilities as we move forward. So, with the foresight that our council has had in approving some additional staff, obviously our community is growing, but we're also going to have an increased maintenance that comes along with those facilities.
Yeah, that's great. The 2 extra staff are already hard at work. I know we've been able to add a snow removal crew this year.
Yeah, we added a snow route, and we split out our downtown route that we had and became kind of more of a focus in the downtown area for this year's snow removal.
Yeah, that's great. Before we transition back to Julie, I wanted to talk about a couple other road projects. So I'm kind of pinballing back and forth here, but let's look out ahead beyond next year and look out in the next maybe 3, 4, 5 years. A couple of the bigger projects come to mind that we often get questions about. If you could just touch in detail on what those are. And I'm thinking 3, the McAllister extension, and then American Legion Road, and then we have a Benton Street reconstruction. So really all corners of the city. We've got south, east, and west there. Can you touch briefly on those projects?
Sure. The McAllister project will be an extension of McAllister from the Sandhill subdivision to Sycamore Street. So as you travel south on Sycamore Street, we have some roundabouts that are already been constructed or been constructed with the previous projects. So we'll have a tie-in at that north roundabout. And so along with that, we're still in the planning phases of that, but we'll have some type of on-street bicycle facility and really start to get that southern arterial developed as we go around that south part of town. We'll have the American Legion Road. So 2019 will be the McAllister Board project. 2020 will be the start of the American Legion Road reconstruction. So that'll be reconstructing American Legion Road from Scott Boulevard out to Taft Avenue. Along with that, we'll have on-street bicycle facilities. We'll have a wide sidewalk that will be constructed with that. We will be looking at an intersection improvement at Scott Boulevard. More than likely, we will be looking at a roundabout at that intersection. And there again, just tying in that corridor with the new school, the new Hoover, as it's been named. Currently this year it's the Longfellow. With that school out there, we're really getting the pedestrian facilities available out there for that corridor. And it's it's going to be it's a project that's been talked about for quite a while. So we'll be moving forward there and developing that. And then the Benton Street project will be it'll be a resurfacing. So we've looking forward to we've had bits and pieces of that corridor that have been resurfaced over the last few years, but really the rough area as we go from Sunset really out to Mormon Trek will be that area that we'll be focusing on. And there again, we have an on-street bicycle facility kind of striped there today, kind of a little narrow shoulder. So there'll be some restriping and some lane width changes to allow for that to be an actual bicycle lane that will be signed in the future.
Great.
All right, we've got another question from Paul. He's asking, with RAGBRAI coming to town, how will you balance the downtown construction projects?
So, you know, we've looked at kind of the schedules of the projects that we have. Right now, the schedule for the Clinton and Burlington Street project, we'll have that construction done prior to RAGBRAI. So, you know, the goal there will be to have that completely done and out of the way. Prior to that, obviously the pedestrian mall project will be ongoing during that project, and we'll deal as best as we can with those things as they come up. You know, the other project that will still be ongoing will be the Park Road project and the Gateway. And that'll be one where more than likely we'll have Park Road closed at that time as we're trying to get that project completed. So I think we'll rely on the existing trails in that area to move the bicycle traffic through that area of town.
Yeah, I'll say on that, you know, we've been talking for a few years on when's a good time to really make the push for RAGBRAI when it comes to construction. And I think if Iowa City waited for construction to kind of be done before we really went after RAGBRAI, we'd be waiting another 42 years or more. There's just not a great time where everything's going to be open. You know, and the Penn Mall will be tough. We'll certainly probably have downtown as a hub of entertainment. But frankly, you know, those businesses that are on the Penn Mall that are having that construction at their front door, we need to support them in any way we can. And one of the ways we can do that is to really try to bring in events like RAGBRAI and do some special programming with the downtown district there to support those businesses through what we know will be a tough time for them. So we'll do our best to provide, you know, safe, secure construction sites while we have the big crowds. And I think we can do that. We've got a lot of practice at hosting big events, and I think we'll be just fine there.
And in regards to the pedestrian mall project, you know, similar to what we did with Washington Street, you know, we'll focus on the interior of those corridors, really get those built out, and then kind of switch stuff over and be working along the building faces. So, you know, we'll be pushing the pedestrians out on, you know, towards the businesses to begin with, and then obviously allowing for the construction to occur along the building faces, which then will have those connections into the buildings, into the businesses.
Martha wants to know, has progress been made on finding a home for bricks being removed from the Penn Mall?
Well, I think we had good response to the survey, and I think we're still accepting some surveys. Is that correct? So you can go online, and we'll try to get you that address where you can fill out a survey. We're trying to take the temperature of the community to see what the appetite will be for wanting those Penn Mall bricks. We certainly think that many people will be interested. So we're going to bid that out as a project alternate. So we're going to see what the cost of salvaging those bricks are. And I think if there's any way that we can make it work to give the community an opportunity to either have a commemorative brick or to build a small patio or walkway from Penn Mall bricks, we'll try to do that. That decision will be in front of the city council as they consider the bids. But I think it's safe to say that it's a cherished space, and people would like to hang on to some mementos in the forms of bricks if they could. Before we transition back to Julie, Ron, there's certainly this time of year especially, it's the pothole season as we call it, with the freeze-thaw cycles. We get a lot of people that have questions on resurfacing and repairs. And then also throughout the season, you and your staff, you do a lot of smaller projects, whether it's improving curb ramps and access points or doing some sidewalk infill. If someone has concerns about sidewalks or curbs or roads in their neighborhood, what's the best way for them to get that to you?
Yeah, you know, in regard, if we have issues with potholes, you know, feel free to call our streets department and report those. We do have a crew that goes out daily and is out filling those potholes. You know, if there's an issue with infill, sidewalk, kind of a missing section of sidewalk, or sidewalk trip hazards, you know, calling into our engineering division in our public works office and reporting those there. We'll at least get staff out and inspect those. And then, those trip hazard pieces, those kind of are addressed kind of in an annual basis. So the property owners will be notified and given a year basically to get those improvements done. Sidewalk curb ramps. Every year we're redoing curb ramps somewhere. We try to focus those not only with our resurfacing programs, but if there is somebody in your neighborhood that you notice is out in the street with a wheelchair or having trouble getting around due to whatever whatever may be causing that, giving us a call and letting us know those areas, we will get those in the program and get those addressed as soon as we can.
Okay, transitioning back to Julie. Thanks for your patience here as we were talking with Ron. You talked a lot about the riverfront crossings and kind of the more traditional neighborhood parks, but one of the great things about our park network is that we have a lot of fantastic natural areas. And it's been a focus of yours since you arrived here a couple of years. Tell us what's going on with our natural areas and our maintenance of those, and how people, what people can expect in terms of our care of those facilities going forward.
Sure. A large portion of our park system is actually natural areas. And we're just so fortunate to be here in the community that values that. This past year, we've had consultants come in and look at our natural areas to see what type of condition they're in. So parks like Hickory Hill Park or Ryerson Woods, our Sand Prairie area, the wetlands area down by our soccer fields, or the Waterworks Prairie Park, are just some of our larger ones. But we also maintain a lot of creek areas in between. A lot of parks have smaller natural areas. We've got a lot of good advice about how to maintain those, and they have prioritized and laid out a plan to improve those spaces. So first of all, a lot of it is removing invasive species. So we have a number of things that we just need manpower. We need people to go out and be able to cut some of the invasive species out. We'll be having some volunteer groups that do that. We have prairie areas that will be burning. And then in some of the parks, we'll be opening up the tree canopy. I already mentioned that once for Hickory Hill Park. In order to have a healthy environment in some of these forested areas, we need sunlight to be able to get down to the ground level, and that doesn't happen when they get choked out by a lot of the invasive species. So we'll see that work. We'll see work along some of the creeks where we'll stabilize the banks, pull back some of the banks too, so that kids can get down and actually tromp around in the creeks. We've got a big list of projects that we want to make the natural areas, first of all, more healthy in an ecological sense, but then more healthy for our community to spend time in as well. I hear that there's a lot of people out doing birding, a lot of doing hiking and other activities out there. We want to encourage all of that. And parks are not just about playgrounds and athletic spaces. They're about a lot of really high quality natural areas. We're also working a lot with our forestry. We have the forestry department under Parks and Recreation. That has been a big emphasis on what we can do to increase the health of our tree canopy around the city. So during the last year, we have been inventorying all of the trees on public land and on the street trees. We have that process almost done, and we're using that as a planning tool for a couple things. First of all, we want to diversify the types of tree species that are throughout the community, so that next time we get the next big tree disease or infestation, we won't knock out all the trees on the same block. So the idea is to have a mix of different species of trees throughout the community. You will be seeing more of the ash trees coming down in the coming year. As we've identified where they're at and the condition of those trees, we are starting to selectively take down more of the ash trees in response to the emerald ash borer. Most of those will be replaced with other species as we go along. And we will also be doing street tree plantings along Camp Cardinal Boulevard and Lower West Branch Road this year.
Great. And we've got some exciting improvements to Hickory Hill Park coming up this year.
Yep, so 2 projects happening at Hickory Hill Park. First of all, one that's been in the works for a couple years. We did a master plan a few years ago. Lots of public input. A lot of people really care about Hickory Hill Park. It's a favorite park out there. What we'll be doing there is going in and doing some work to stabilize the trails. Not really changing many of the trails. There's a few on the western side that we will kind of reroute in a few areas, but generally staying the same, not paving any trails that people always want to know that right off the bat. Adding some signage, which I always say was interesting during this process because we had just as many people tell us they like to get lost in Hickory Hill Park as those that want to find their way out. So not obtrusive signage, but signage throughout so that if you're back in one of the trails and you don't know your way out, you'll at least have some guidance to do that. There'll be 2 bridges that will be replaced. And then a second project that we received money from the state DNR for is to do some ecological restoration. So once again, some tree removals, invasive species removal, and work on the creek bank.
Great. Do we have a question?
Yeah, we do. Are there long-term plans to eventually replace City Park Pool, especially with the recent work that's been done to the pools, that has been done to the pool structure?
Yeah, there aren't any currently. In fact, we just took a look at the structure of that pool. Amazing that it's still intact and functioning as well as it's functioning right now. We find that residents really like it because it's different than the aquatic facilities around us. People like that it's a big open pool with still having the diving boards and that sort of thing. So at this point, no, I don't believe there's any plans. We plan to keep it classic and keep it operating similar to how it is now.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, here's one. What is your role in the budget process on having funding for tax credits? I understand the city council votes on these, but as the city manager, do you have a role in providing what amount of the budget is available?
No, so the tax credit question comes up, and there's really one tax credit program that's offered by the state. It's called the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program. It allows developers to access some state incentives, but in order for them to access those state incentives, they have to get the city council approval. They have to have a resolution of support, and they have to have a $1,000 match per unit. So if you're building a 100-unit building, you have to have $1,000 per each of those 100 units from the city. We don't necessarily budget for that. It's a relatively small dollar figure that comes through. My role in determining that is simply to make a recommendation to the city council. So as a developer comes forward and requests a city support and a $1,000 match for his or her project, I would make that recommendation to the city council. Ultimately, the elected officials are the one that make that determination. Okay. We have a few more minutes left, so get any final questions in that you want. I want to wrap up our programmed piece by circling back to something I started with, and we talked a lot about streets and transportation and parks. Obviously our budget is much bigger than that. As a city, we always try to budget for those core services first. You heard a little bit about that today, and then we kind of shift to those council priorities. So a few things that we didn't touch on that I think folks might be interested in as we look at our core services and what's in this budget going forward. There's a consideration to add 2 new police officer positions. It's something that we haven't been able to do in recent years, but as I mentioned before, we've added roughly 10% of our population in the last 6 years, and there are growing public safety services that have to come with that. So we do have 2 new officers plugged into the budget. We also have a housing inspection program that'll grow with this next budget as well. Ron talked a lot about street resurfacing, and that is something that we have put a lot of extra dollars into in recent years. And I was checking some budget numbers before we started here, and since 2015, if we compare the 2015 budget to the 2019 budget, we've increased our road improvement funds by about 212%, and that's just the annual maintenance projects. That's not inflated by Gateway or some of the other large projects that we're taking on. So I think this council's really been committed to providing those key core services that people think about. As we look at some of their strategic priorities that we didn't touch on here tonight, know that there's a big emphasis on affordable housing. So the council, starting a couple of years ago, started to actually budget funds to increase the supply of affordable housing. That will continue. They haven't landed on a dollar amount yet, but that is taking place. And there's a whole host of other strategies, some budget related, some not, more policy related when it comes to affordable housing. But I want to make sure that the public knows that that's a priority of the city councils, and they're working hard to address that. The other one that I'd like to touch on is another plan that is currently being worked on, and that's our climate mitigation and adaptation plan. That's a council-appointed citizen committee that's been working for probably 6 or 7 months now to develop a plan, and they'll be finishing up this spring. We don't know exactly what those recommendations will be from that group, but this budget does include funds to implement whatever it is they may come up with. So as the council has climate change in mind and making sure our community is adapting to the changing climate that we're in, know that there are resources provided in this budget to get us started down that path. Do you have any final comments, Ron or Julie?
No.
Anything else you want to add? Katie, do you have anything for us?
Yeah, we do. We have some questions that have been circulating in that were a little bit off topic, but now we can open it up for
Great.
some questions. So the first one we'll ask is from Edward, and he wants to know, when will we get our new, larger recycling bins?
Yeah, so we have just placed our order for the new bins. We have the trucks in place to be able to pick those up. So we will be focusing on some of the heavier, the larger recyclers, and then look at the routes that those larger recyclers are on. So it will be a project to roll those out, and it will be phased. It's not something that's going to happen all at one time. So we're probably looking at a 3-year rollout in regards to the new cards.
Okay. And that rollout will start sometime later this year?
It will start this year. As I mentioned, we have 4 new trucks as far as recycle trucks, so we're ready to go in regards to being able to pick those up. And with that, we will have a recycle container similar to what the garbage containers are today. So there'll be 65-gallon containers, and then we'll also have yard waste containers that'll be 95-gallon containers. And then we have some smaller containers that will be for food waste. So we're really moving forward in regards to that waste diversion program that's been laid out.
Speaking of recycling, Kathy wants to know, is there any plans for recycling containers at parks?
We actually, it's one of our initiatives of our Parks Commission. They've asked us to look into that. Part of the Park Master Plan gave us standardized equipment to have throughout the park, including both trash and recycling. Now it will take a while to roll that out. We have done it at Terry Trueblood Recreation Area and our athletic complexes, both of the rec centers. We have it at some sites. The Terry Trueblood Lodge and Ashton House also have the recycling available. But yes, definitely our plans are to continue rolling it out throughout the parks.
All right, Derek wants to know, any long-term plans to expand the pedestrian mall? Seems to be a good move, but may be too early for discussions like that.
Yeah, so back in 2012 and 13, we did a downtown streetscape plan, and that question came up pretty early on, and there was some talk, do you look to extend it north to Dubuque or maybe east onto College? And ultimately, the feedback that we received in the decision that was made was to keep the Ped Mall at its current size. One of the things that we really want to do with some of the streetscape improvements, though, is improve the pedestrian space. Even if there's not going to be an expansion of the pedestrian mall, really ask that question, how do you improve the pedestrian space? Hopefully you saw that with our Washington Street reconstruction project. With that project that was completed a couple of years ago, we really shrunk the size of the roadway. Now there's still 2 lanes of traffic, but we moved from the angled parking to parallel parking. We shrunk the roadway and we added a lot of sidewalk space. So you see bigger cafes, you see more room for pedestrians. So that was our way of not extending the Ped Mall, but making sure that we signal that pedestrians have the priority in this area. The next, after we get through the Ped Mall, the current budget shows about a year break. So 2018, 2019 focused on the Ped Mall. 2020 we take a year break, and then 2021 we would work on the 1-block stretch of Dubuque from Washington up to Iowa. That is one of the widest streets that we have in the downtown area, and if you can think of that, those sidewalks on Dubuque Street, they're actually fairly narrow. It's hard for even businesses to have outdoor cafes on Dubuque Street, and you've seen them spill out. We've actually allowed them to spill out onto the parking areas like Mickey's and Nodo and others. So With that Dubuque Street project, the plan is again to shrink the road, much like we did on Washington, and give the pedestrians more space.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, but David wants to know, what is the schedule for the proposed Foster Road extension?
You want that one?
Sure. So the Foster Road extension from Dubuque Street to Prairie du Chien, it has been a project that's been on our unfunded list for quite some time. And we actually, in 2003, did a water main extension, a fill line for the Rochester tank in the corridor that will be the future road corridor for Foster Road. So with that, the grading was done. Obviously, the water main was put in. Now it's still on our unfunded list, but there is a potential development project that has come before us that will construct that roadway from kind of where it ends today into a chip seal over to Prairie du Chien. Install utilities as necessary, wide sidewalks, and also look at an on-street bicycle facility there. And that'll be a project that potentially an urban renewal area and have a TIF in there, so the development will help pay for that roadway, and then the city would also pay for the share that's not within the project area.
So we may see this project is coming before the council, starting really at their next meeting, and we'll take several meetings to get through the entire process, but by the end of, I would say maybe March, April timeframe, all the decisions could be made, and you could see that extension actually being constructed late spring and perhaps even done before the end of the year. So while it's not in our budget, as Ron said, development may drive that road, as development often does, and there's a good possibility that this time next year that road would be fully constructed and usable to the public.
We've only got a few minutes left, but we'll squeeze in this last question. Has the city been looking into ways to incorporate green energy for city buildings?
Yes, a very timely question. That's an initiative of our city council. They asked us to take a deep look into potential solar or wind, any type of renewable energy projects. So we recently hired a consultant to help us evaluate what our best opportunities might be. So I believe we have 6 or 7 sites that are being evaluated now. Some sites that you might be familiar with, like the airport, or some of our more well-known facilities, but also some of our outlying facilities like the water plant or the wastewater plant, where we have some wide open areas or potentially some large roof areas. So we expect that analysis will take a couple of months, and probably the city council will start talking about implementing their first solar project. I would say probably 3-4 months from now they'd have the information to really start making some of those decisions. Okay, well, thanks Ron, thanks Julie, and thanks everybody for tuning in and being with us on our first Facebook Live experiment with the Budgets Basics. We had a good time here. Hopefully you picked something up. If there's some questions you didn't get to ask, feel free to continue to submit those. We will monitor the thread and do our best to respond in a timely manner.